Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Mariah with the UAP Medical Coalition. Joining us today is Deb
Cobble.
Kauble. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this video belong solely to the speaker and not necessarily to UAP Medical Coalition, its employees, volunteers, or associates. All medical references are for informational purposes only. This is not a consultation or a therapy session. This content can be triggering for some and is not meant for children. So please introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, my name is Debra Jordan-Kauble. Most people in the ufology genre probably might recognize me better as Kathie Davis from Bud Hopkins' book Intruders. That book was based on an experience that I had, centered around an experience I had on June 30th, 1983. And then it expands around myself, my family, and neighbors and friends and stuff. But that's been 40 years ago. So it's been quite a long time. And there's a whole new generation of people out there that probably don't have any idea who I am now.
Well, thank you for letting us know. Bud Hopkins, that's a pretty big deal. What was it like working with him?
He saved my life as far as I'm concerned. I reached out to him after the June 30, 83 experience. And the only reason I knew about him is I had just happened to pick up the book that he had written called Missing Time. And I had was not able to finish that book, by the way, because I kept having panic attacks when I was reading it. But I did note that there was an address in the back where I could reach out to the author if I felt like I might have had one of these experiences. So I did. I went back to the library, got the address, and I wrote to him. And probably, I don't know, 6 weeks or so later, he called. And first thing he did was when he decided he wanted to investigate my case further, he set me up with a buddy. He has like the buddy system on. It wasn't online. It was on. I got her phone number, and she actually called me, and we talked on the phone, and I wrote letters back and forth because this was 1983, so we didn't have the internet or cell phones or anything like that. It was all done.
Convenience of email.
Yeah, it was all done like after 6 p.m. long distance calls and lots of letter writing. But eventually I went to New York, and then he came to Indiana. And that happened a couple times. And he arranged for me to have testing done at a hospital in New York. He arranged for me to meet with the psychiatrist the first time I went to New York. And he also arranged for me to have a voice stress test, which I think is kind of like a lie detector test.
Right.
And, he kind of hooked me up into a network of people like me, introduced me to people that had experiences like I had. And I don't know, it helped, but it was still difficult because I lived here in Indiana and he lived in New York. And so I was here by myself for a lot of those years. And sometimes I could go years without even talking about this to anybody. So
that must have been hard.
It was very lonely. I'm fortunate that I had members of my family that were also involved and had experiences, and friends that had been with me and had experiences because they were hanging out with me. And so I did have more support than a lot of people in my shoes back then. And that's probably one of the main reasons why I was okay with Bud when he wanted to write the book about me and my family. I mean, it was a family discussion and we had to decide whether or not we wanted him to do it, but eventually we did. And one of the reasons was because it could help people like me and my family.
And I'm sure it has helped countless people. And I'd really like to thank you for doing that with him back then. And even now it's still so relevant and there's so many people that benefit from it.
Well, I'm glad, and it makes me glad to hear, because that was like, I wanted to pay forward. I was fortunate to be supported, and I want to be supportive of people like me.
So. That's great. That's awesome. And that's what this is going to help a lot of people too. So would you like to tell us a little bit about your encounter or your experience?
Yeah, I've had a lot of different experiences throughout my life at different points in my life, but the June 30, 1983 one, which was the central story in Intruders, was also probably the most significant that I've had and made the most impact on me, changed me the most mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. Uh, Even I feel like created some damage physically to my body, to my eyes and stuff, even though I don't feel it was malicious. I feel it was unintentional, like a side effect, you know. But I was living with my parents at the time. I was a single mom with 2 little kids, and I was getting ready to go cut out some patterns with the gal who lived behind us. And as I was getting ready to leave the house, I was standing at the kitchen window and I noticed a strange light coming out of the pump house of the swimming pool. And I mentioned it to my mom before I got ready to leave, and she didn't seem very concerned about it. So I went ahead and about 5 minutes later got in my car. And as I was getting ready to leave, I decided to pull along the side drive and go back to the turnaround behind the house just to have one more look. And I wasn't thinking about aliens. I was thinking about burglars, because my father had a big workshop back there with a bunch of Indian motorcycles in it and little British race cars that he restored. So would definitely be a target for burglars. But I drove down the turnaround and came back up the side drive. And as I did, I noticed that the pedestrian door to the garage that was attached to the house was open. But instead of stopping and telling my mom at the time, I just went on over to my friend's house because it was just right behind ours, next street over. And I called mom and I told her. She said, "Don't worry about it. Your dad will come home. When your dad gets home, he can close it. I'll just lock the doors." I'm like, "Okay." So I hung the phone up and immediately she called back. And she said, "I need you to come home right now." And she sounded scared, which was not like her. And it kind of disturbed me a little bit. And my girlfriend's husband heard me talk to my mom, and he said, "Tell her to call the police. That's what we pay them for." And she heard him and she said, "I don't want anyone here but you." And I said, "Okay." So I told my friends, "I'll be back." And I went home. Uh, I walked around the back yard. Once I got there, I went around the backyard looking. I checked the swimming pool pump house. I went back by the workshop to make sure that everything looked okay there. Uh, on the way back up to the house, I noted that my dog was under my dad's ladder truck, which was back behind the swimming pool by the workshop, but she would not come out. When I tried to get her to come out from under the truck, she wouldn't come. Oh, the pump house looked fine. The door to the garage was still open, so I went in and I went into the garage. I flipped the light on. I was looking around and I was getting ready to look behind um, some mattresses that were up against the wall. And when I first pulled up, I had picked up a shotgun that was my dad's, that was in the Florida room. That's what we called it. Even though it wasn't loaded, whoever I might encounter wouldn't know that until I got close enough to hit him. That's what I told mom. So I went to, as I'm in there looking around with this shotgun like Elmer Fudd, all of a sudden I felt hot. And I felt like my skin was burning. First started like a hot flash, and I felt like I was on fire. And I remember thinking, "Oh my God, I got to get out of here right now." And I turned to run towards the open pedestrian door to get out. And when I did, something hit me right here. I guess I called it chest, solar plexus area, right in there. It was a ball of light, and it was so intense and so bright that I know my eyes were closed, but I could still see it. And I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. And I remember thinking, "Oh my God, I'm dead." I'm thinking, "I'm dead." And I started to shake. I couldn't move, but my body was shaking, and the shaking increased to the point where it was like a vibrating. And that increased to the point where it felt like every molecule of my body was coming apart. And I have absolutely no idea how long I was in that condition. But I know when the intensity of the light started to fade, I realized I was no longer in the doorway, but I was actually out maybe 10, 15 feet onto the concrete patio. At some point in that little interaction, I felt something pulling on the back of my shoulder, pulling me down, and I felt something burning sensation in my right ear. And I remember hearing a voice say it was unfortunate that I had felt pain. I didn't see anybody, but I heard this voice. And then when I'm out on the patio, which I don't even know how I got there, I still can't move, but the light intensity has waned to the point where I can see, but now my eyes are real splotchy, like flashbulb blotches, in my vision. And in front of me, I can see it's dark outside, and I can see that there are what I think are children in my mom and dad's backyard. And I'm thinking, and I remember thinking to myself, what are these kids doing in my mom's backyard? And as I'm thinking that, and I'm watching them kind of all come together from different areas of the yard, and I think, oh my God, my kids. And I immediately hear that voice again say, your kids are fine, your children are fine. And I see these little, what I think are little kids, 6 of them, line up off to my right over by the driveway. And they kind of slide or glide towards me, but not right to me. They're kind of coming, in front of me. And that's when I saw the thing in the yard, which we called a craft, and I can't imagine how even 6 little kids could get in this thing and fly anywhere, because it was very small. It wasn't much bigger than the pump house of the swimming pool. It was egg-shaped, like an egg on its big side down, and maybe about 10 feet tall, and diameter maybe at the widest part, maybe 8 or 10 feet around. And there was a ball of light a few feet from it, about as high up off the ground as I am tall. I'm 5'2", 5'3", and it went down really slow and then came back up really slow. And I felt for some reason that it was looking at me, but I don't know why. At that point, I don't even know what happened to the kids. I remember watching them gliding in front of me. And then when I saw this thing, I lost all thought of them and was just thinking, oh my God, what is that? And I hope it doesn't come near me. It was one of those things where you don't want to, you want to look at it because you need to know where it is, but you don't want to look at it, So, and I hear the ball of light. I see the ball of light, and then I hear something say, it's okay. My kids are all right. And then the next thing I remember is I hear my name. But this time when I heard my name, something changed. And it was like someone snapped their fingers, and I woke up. And I remember at that point being able to move, and I turned towards the sound of my name, and I start walking up to the steps that go up to the upper porch where the kitchen was. And there was my mom standing in the doorway, and she says, is everything okay? And I said, yeah, everything's cool. But I'm thinking, I feel weird, and I don't want to go back over to Deanna's and cut patterns. So Deanna ends up coming over to my house with her teenage daughter, and we go swimming instead of cutting out patterns. As we're walking across, I can't remember how long it took them to get over to the house. And it wasn't terribly long, and that they were there. And then we were walking across the yard to the swimming pool, and her daughter steps on something in the yard, and she's complaining and says it burns, and she says it's tingling. Then it's like her foot's going numb, and then her leg's going numb. And Deanna thought maybe she stepped on a bee. So we got out to the pool. We didn't see any sting or anything. We just assumed that if it was whatever it was, the cool pool water would feel good on it. So we all got in the pool. And we weren't in the pool very long until we were all very nauseous. And my eyes hurt. My eyes started burning. I started noticing white halo-like things around all the lights outside, kind of like when you stick your head in the swimming pool would open your eyes in the chlorine for a bunch of times. And then, it kind of reminded me of that, except for I didn't get my head under the water. But anyway, we ended up cutting the night, or we ended up cutting the night short, and they went home and I went to bed. And when I got up the next morning, my eyes were swelled shut and they was in so much pain that my mom took me to the emergency room. But by that point, I did not remember the bright light or the kids or the thing in the yard or any of that. And so we got to the emergency room, and for whatever reason, there was an actual eye physician in the emergency room, which I'm assuming they don't hang out there often, but there was one there. And he asked my mom if she could take me across the street to his office because he had more equipment he could check me out with there. So she did. And the first thing he said to me was, "Have you looked into the arc of a welder's torch? Have you looked into the sun?" I'm like, "No, why would I do anything like that?" He was very surprised that my eyes had not bothered me the day before and that it had all come up so quick because they were so bad. And I believe he treated it like conjunctivitis, and I had creams and eye drops. It took a couple of weeks for my eyes to get better. At that point, as my eyes healed, I became very farsighted, and I never wore glasses before then. And my eyes have never been right since. Just a side note before I forget, I was diagnosed with macular degeneration and cataracts in my mid-30s. And by the time I was 50, I had both my lenses replaced. I have acrylic lenses in my eyes. And I have to be dilated and watched every 6 months because of the macular degeneration. And my doctor's like, I'm a very young person. I was a very young person to have all that. And for some reason, I always blamed that night because my eyes were never the same after that. So anyway, back to that next day, my eyes are a wreck. I'm physically, emotionally, I'm feeling very anxious. I can't sleep. I feel like I'm, having a nervous breakdown in a way. I can't go to the bathroom in the upstairs bathroom because there's a window there and it overlooks this eventual mark in the yard that we saw a couple days later. A couple days later, the kids are all over. We're getting ready to go swimming. It's 4th of July weekend holiday. And all the kids run out back, and my oldest nephew comes back inside and he says, "Grandma, there's something wrong with your yard." So we all ran out to see what he was talking about. And there was this mark in the yard it was an 8-foot diameter circle with a 49-foot swath that shot all the way across the yard to the driveway. And it ended in a perfect arc, and all the grass in the mark was just laid down and flat, just laid down. It wasn't like crushed or grinded. It just kind of laid down and turned this real grayish beige color. And the dirt underneath of it was hard and it smelled kind of weird. There was a crack on one side, and I took one of those 12-inch rulers out there to see if I could see how deep the crack was. And I accidentally dropped it and it disappeared. I never got it back. But my mother looks at this mark and she kind of laughs and she goes, "That's where our UFO landed the other night." And I looked at my mom and I thought, "What is wrong with you?" Because she's giggling a little bit, like a nervous giggle. The kids are all giggling, and I'm not giggling. I'm like somebody's just smacked me in the face with reality or something. It's like, as soon as she said that, again, like someone snapped their fingers, and I started to remember things. And I started really feeling crazy. I saw big black eyes, superimposed over this mark in the yard. I started, from that point on for days, I started remembering the light, which I didn't say anything to the doctor when she took me to the emergency room. I didn't say anything to him about the light because I didn't remember it at that point. But then all that started coming back, as well as memories of things that had happened to me when I was younger that I had just kind of logged away that I hadn't thought about in years. And another thing that came back to me was the book I had tried to read and the address in the back. So that's what triggered me to eventually go get missing time and write to Bud about this. I also had some crazy dreams. And I started seeing things in my mind. I would be awakened in the middle of the night with these visions of symbols and phrases, and I couldn't go back to sleep until I drew them. I wrote them down. So I started keeping a notepad by my bed. It got so bad at one point, like I could be driving down the street, just my mind is like just blank, and all of a sudden a thought would come in my head and I could not focus on anything until I pull over and write it down. Once I put it down where it wouldn't be lost, and I could go back to whatever it's doing and I'd be fine. So I had some like drawings of symbols and things. And I always say that night, June 30, 83, something in me, like Debbie died and Debbie 2.0 was born. And, that first year was really rough. I felt like I was having a nervous breakdown. I couldn't sleep at night. I would hear sounds. I would hear like tones in my ear knocking on the wall. I'd see things moving through the house. It was bad. And I thought I was going crazy. One of the things I said to the psychiatrist when Bud took me to the hospital for testing, I had 6 hours of psychological and verbal testing. And I told the psychiatrist that was testing me, I said, it's okay if you tell me I'm crazy because I know they make pills for that. And I would be more than happy to take them because I just wanted a normal life. And I didn't want my kids to be affected by this stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's a big, long story. I apologize, but
No, don't apologize at all. It's actually really important for people to hear it. It's pretty intense.
It was pretty intense. That mark in the yard lasted 2 years and snow melted off of it for the first year. Whenever it would snow that first year, after we get a couple inches of snow, it would literally melt away and you could see the mark in the yard.
Wow.
And Bud sent some soil samples off for testing, and there were some unusual things about the soil, and I think it's recorded in the book Intruders what that was. And I actually myself still have several pieces of the soil that when I got him samples, I took some for myself and I've kept him ever since, hoping maybe someday technology would be better and somebody might look at it.
Have you looked into that at all?
I've asked around, several times to people that I thought I might be interested, but no one seems to be interested. So, well, it's still sitting in my strong box.
Has there been any kind of changes to the composition of the soil, or has it remained the same?
It looks exactly the same as it did when I put it in there, like rock.
Wow.
One of the things interesting about this soil was that you could put a piece of this soil in a glass of water and a piece of the soil from the outside part that wasn't affected. And the next day, the outside soil would just be mud, but this would just be a rock.
Oh, wow.
It wouldn't even take water.
Wouldn't break down at all.
Nope.
Wow. So okay, so you talked a lot about the physical effects. How much longer after your experience did you meet up with Bud Hopkins to do the psychological testing, and was it?
It was probably within the first year.
Okay.
It was within the first year. Like I said, you got to remember this was in 83 before the internet. So, and we lived a good distance from each other. I had a washer and dryer combo that I had put in storage when I moved back home with my parents. And I actually took those out of storage and sold them to get enough money to get a bus ticket to go to New York to see him for the first time. So, we had to work with finances, what we had. I didn't have any. Bud, I think a lot of the testing that he had done on me, somebody either donated the money to pay for it or donated the actual, testing. I don't know. But, and sometimes Bud he put out his own money. He was desperately trying to help me and I was desperate for his help. I was thankful for it.
Yeah, I can imagine. At that point in time, it was probably pretty heavy emotionally to deal with.
I thought I was going crazy. I really did. And, now I'm 65 years old now, almost. When I look back on my life and how I've changed because of it on everything, and how my life has changed because of it, I wouldn't change anything, but but it was terrifying. So, and it was hard and scary. It was like a rebirth but it was not an easy birth.
I
It
know
was
exactly.
like a breech birth.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. I was actually paralyzed in a car accident 6 years ago, and even though it was, the hardest thing I've ever had to go through, and still is, very difficult, I wouldn't change it for anything because my life since has been just completely different, and it's been a lot better.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. If the June's if the June like I had weird experiences, and I had a memory of the little gray guys with the big eyes coming in my bedroom when I was a young married woman back in um, 78. But this June 30 83 incident, and that led me to Bud, uh, and also made the majority of changes to me physically and mentally, uh, was it was like the catalyst. It changed my life. Would If it hadn't been for that experience, my life now would be absolutely unrecognizable in any way, shape, or form, and my kids' life would be unrecognizable. Because my son would not have met his wife, or I wouldn't have my granddaughter. I mean, there's nothing about my life that would be the same had it not been for this. So I'm thankful for that. I have to keep my gratitude.
Right, right. That's amazing to be able to find the silver lining, so to speak, of such a traumatizing experience, and to be grateful for what has come from it. Um, so immediately after, when your eyes were swollen up, you went to the hospital, um, and you just saw the eye specialist, or did you talk to anyone else at the hospital that day?
Well, we checked into the emergency room, and whoever the doctors were and the nurses were that checked us in, and then in walks a doctor who's actually an actual eye doctor. You know what I mean?
Right. Just so happened.
And yeah, that's why I've always thought that is strange. Why would he be in the emergency room? Because they don't typically hang out in emergency rooms, but he was
Right.
there. So it was basically, my mom took me out of the emergency room before I actually was seen by anybody there for doctors other than this guy, and then took me across the street to his office, and they worked me in. He had his girls work me in there, and he put all his little eyeball things on there and looked in my eyes and stuff. So
And at that point, you still didn't remember what had happened.
no, no, I didn't say anything to him about the bright light, the burning, and the eyes burning, uh, you know, and not being able to move, or any of the other stuff, because I didn't remember any of it at that point. The memory of that did not come back until I saw the mark in the yard. That was my trigger. And what my mom said, that was what triggered me, that my memory just started. It was like somebody pulled the finger out of the dike, and the memories just started flooding back.
Yeah, yeah. You just needed that little bit of triggering from. So your mom, um, did you talk to your mom about it?
Oh,
Like after she had said that, did you talk to her about anything that had happened?
not that night,
No.
because I didn't remember any of it. But once it started coming back, I did tell her, what the bits and pieces that I remembered. And the only thing that she had to comment on it was, she said, like a week later, like a week after the fact, she says to me, I just remembered last night why I called you to come home, which I thought was odd that she would call me to come home, because my mom's not like that.
Right.
Uh, and she goes, I just remembered why I called you to come home that night. And I'm like, why? And she's like, well, I was standing here at the kitchen window, and I looked up and I saw a basketball size ball of white light around the bird feeder. That they had a big bird feeder out by the kitchen window in the backyard. And she said, I thought at first that it was like somebody's flashlight beam was shining on the bird feeder. And then I didn't see anybody. She said, I didn't see anybody. And then I wondered maybe if you were coming back, that it was like headlights coming from the side drive. But she says, I didn't see, no car showed up. And she said, I kept looking at this light and it got smaller and smaller and smaller. And then poof, she said, it just disappeared like that, poof. And the minute it disappeared, I got the thought in my head to call you that I needed to get you back here right now. And I'm like, well, damn. I looked at her and I said, well, damn, Mom, I don't know if I'd have come home if you'd have told me that. I may have said, just lock the door and call 911, but
right.
yeah, that was that. I thought that was really strange that she was like, a week later, she remembered why she called me back. I don't even know. I don't think she saw anything out there when she was standing. When I first saw her in the kitchen door, it almost seemed like she was asleep, or, you know what I mean? Like inanimate. And then as soon as she saw me, she like woke up and said, oh, is everything okay?
So she was kind of like in a daze.
Yeah. She seemed a little strange, but my parents were very supportive of me. My dad and I both tried to figure out what on earth could cause this crap in the yard. And he was a ham radio operator, and his ham radio tower was not too terribly far from where this mark was in the yard. It had a 100-foot ham tower there. And there was another 100-foot radio tower over by his workshop. And there was coax cable that ran into the house from the tower that went to my dad's ham set, his amateur radios. And the coax cable running into the house melted inside the cable stuff.
Oh, wow.
And my dad, I don't know, I called the agricultural agent for the state of Indiana at Purdue University and talked to him about the mark in the yard. And, he could tell me 1,000 things that it wasn't, but he couldn't tell me what it was. My father did his own kind of investigation, and at one point, he and my Uncle Jim found this like World War II Geiger counter. And I don't have any idea where Uncle Jim got it from. But so Dad and Uncle Jim are out trying to mess with this Geiger counter because they think this thing might be radioactive. And they can't get the Geiger counter to 0 anywhere near the house. They have to go like to the field behind the house before it starts to act right.
Oh, wow.
So now, having said that, I have no idea if either one of them knew what they were doing, or if the old Geiger counter from World War II actually worked properly. It could be a case of a couple of old guys and a piece of junk equipment that they didn't know how to use. I have no idea, but they tried,
Yeah,
and
at least they tried.
And I find it interesting that, the thing was, they were supporting me. They didn't question anything I said, that when I told them the things that I remembered, because they were there. Mom was there. Apparently, I don't remember. She saw the ball of light over the bird feeder. So, and then when Bud came out, several months later, when he came out for his first visit, he hit the bricks and he was knocking on doors around the neighbors to see if there had been any witnesses to that night. And as it turns out, there were 2 neighbors that both independently reported something very strange on that night. The gal that was directly to the north of us, there was a little bit of wooded area that divided our house. When Bud spoke to her, she told him and her husband that she heard a loud, booming sound from our backyard, and that her television screen turned red and her whole house shook. And her husband told Bud that when he came home from work, he found her hiding behind a couch, and she was babbling about the little man coming to take her, or something like that, something to that effect.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then the other lady across the road from us, directly across the road, and these houses are pretty far apart where this happened. She was a shift nurse at the hospital where I went to, as a matter of fact. but she was second shift nurse, and she was in bed about to get up and get ready for her shift or overnight shift or whatever it was. She worked the off shift. And she said that she was awakened early because she said it sounded like a jet airplane was about to crash into her house, and her whole house shook and her lights flickered. And the strange thing that Bud noted was that the clocks in the front of this woman's house stopped, just in the front. And the front is where it was the closest to our house, is where the clock stopped at her in the front of her house. So, and this was a long time later, months and months later, when he found these people, and then there was another neighbor that was several houses down. They said they didn't notice anything that night, but they had in the past seen strange things over this house before we even lived here. So there's always that too. And then like 20 years later, Bud, long after Intruders was published and the miniseries was on TV and all that, and it was well known, he gets a letter from a gal who lived directly behind my parents' house on Hunter Road. And she said that her boys were out. Her boys liked to spend the night in the garage with their buddies when they were teenagers, and their opening garage faced our house, but there was woods between the houses. And she said one night around that time frame, she can't pinpoint the exact day because it was 20 years ago, but she remembered that these boys all came running in absolutely hysterical, saying that they had seen dozens of basketball-sized balls of white light floating through the woods between our house and their house. And it scared them so badly that they all came running in, were freaking out, and they never slept in the garage again after that.
Oh, man. Yeah, it must have been terrifying.
So it's just been, it's just if it had just only been me, I would have sworn up and down I'd lost my mind and was having a nervous breakdown, except for the mark in the yard and Mom and the neighbors, and then this lady later, and then the strange things with the soil, and just, it was just too much to just blow off as nothing.
Yeah, definitely. And then especially getting that kind of confirmation from everyone else in the area.
Yeah.
Sure, that kind of helped to solidify.
And that's why I also feel like my eyes were damaged that night, even though I can't prove it, and I'm never going to be able to prove it, and it's never going to be. And I have had other weird physical things happen to me since then. And my mind drifts back to that night. The dog that I found outside under the ladder truck that wouldn't come out that night, we had to put her to sleep like 6 or 8 weeks later.
Oh my gosh.
Her hair started falling out, and she got big black sores all over her back. Her teeth started falling out. Her eyes went all white, and she couldn't eat. I mean,
oh my gosh.
We took her to the vet, and the vet put her to sleep because there wasn't anything we could do about it.
Oh, wow.
And so I always in the back of my mind think, somebody going to put me to sleep one of these days? I already knew my eyes were messed up. But
what other kind of physical effects have you noticed?
Now, years later, I had 2 emergency surgeries within 6 weeks of each other in 2020 for partial bowel blockages. And when they got in there, I had C-sections, so I did have some scar tissue and a gallbladder removal when I was 13. So I did have scar tissue, but somehow all the scar tissue overgrew in my abdominal cavity to the point where it created a webbing that surrounded all of my internal organs, to the point that I had like 40 partial bowel blockages because it was just all twisted around my small intestines. It took, when my first surgery was supposed to take a couple hours, and it took like 5. He had to actually call another surgeon in because he said every time he clipped one, 2 more popped up. So he had one surgeon on each side of me clipping all these tendrils of this scar tissue. Then, 6 weeks later, when I had a ileus, like a flipped intestine, that caused another blockage. They went back in, they found like 20 more or more of the same thing that had uncovered. And I was diagnosed with this disorder called fibromuscular dysplasia in my renal arteries. And what happened, the way they explained to me at the vascular surgeons, is that inside my renal arteries have grown like little spider webs that attach to the arterial wall, and then they pull my arteries closed. So they had to do a renal angioplasty, and they went up into my renal artery and they blew up these little balloons and popped all these strings that were all spider web. He called it a spider web in my artery, which makes me go back to remembering what the doctor said about how it looked like my small intestines was encased in a net.
Wow.
Web. And I have nodules. I have so far non-malignant, because I've had a biopsy of my thyroid, biopsy of my nodule. I have nodules in my liver, nodules in my pancreas, nodules in my lungs, nodules in my thyroid. So far, they're all benign, but they're just, it's all in that same area where the light hit me. And I developed, back in 2017, I developed something called ocular migraines, where I start seeing these multicolored triangular prisms of swirling light in the vision of my eye. And then once that stops, after about 15 or 20 minutes, then I'm blind. I am blind in both eyes for about 15 or 20 minutes. It's the same kind of splotchy vision I had that night on June 30th, 1983. With the white splotches, and I can't see. Fortunately, about 20 or 30 minutes, it goes away and I'm okay. I don't even get a headache really from it. I just get kind of tired. And I've been checked over. It's not my eyeballs. It's in my brain. It's in the visual cortex part of my brain.
Wow.
And I can't help but feel. I can't prove anything. I cannot help but feel that these weird anomalies that I'm having medically have some connection, because there's nobody else in my family that has this crap.
Right.
And,
that was going to be my next question. Is there any kind of family history, or did you have any kind of previous problems like that before your encounter?
No. I had high blood pressure when I was a teenager, and they had me on blood pressure medicine. It could be that I had the beginning of something going on with my renal artery, but I had, I had tons of x-rays and tests and all the other stuff. They should have seen something like that before now, because I had been tested.
And I'm sorry, how old did you say you were when it happened?
When
the encounter happened?
It was in 83. I believe I was like 23 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm 64 now. I'll be 65 in February. So I was in my early 20s. Yeah.
So definitely pretty young to be having all these serious health conditions.
Well, yeah. Then, I mean, these some of the other ones have come up later, but I still feel there's somehow some connection. And when I told you that I was having these episodes where I would have memories of, like people were telling me things that I needed to know, one of the things that was said to me was, the answers that you seek will all be in your blood. And, I just can't help but with all the weird stuff that's happened to me over my life, and all the strange, like I said, anomalies of medical strangeness that I've had, it would be great if somebody could like do a really deep dive. I haven't said anything to any of my physical doctors, like my cardiologist or my gastroenterologist or my eye doctor. I haven't said anything to them about all the weird stuff that's happened to me, because I'm not quite sure how to tell them and not sound crazy, and I'm afraid they won't treat me for my, problems.
Right. They'll just treat you like you're crazy.
Like I'm crazy. But now I have a therapist too. I mean, because not only, have this stuff been traumatic, but I watched my husband commit suicide, and he shot himself in front of me with a 12 gauge shotgun.
Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that.
And I had a tornado hit my house and destroyed everything I owned and trapped me in the closet. So it's like the universe just keeps throwing shit at me, like, here, you're strong enough, you can do this, you can do this. So obviously I have a therapist now, and she's great. And I was diagnosed with PTSD by the psychiatrist that Bud had taken me to. But also my therapist now, I have a diagnosis of PTSD, obviously, just for regular life stuff,
Right.
but I started telling her about the weird stuff, the mark in the yard, and the stuff that happened to me back then. And she was receptive, and she listens. And we've actually done EMDR therapy on the June 30th, 1983 incident, which I feel has helped me. And we've done EMDR therapy on, the suicide and the tornado and everything as well. And she always told me from my beginning, when I first met her, she said, for the things you've been through with the suicide and with the tornado, you are coping with it so well. And you know what? She says, and that was my cue. I thought, maybe I'm coping with all of this stuff because I've already had traumatic stuff that I had to learn to live with. And so that's when I thought, well, let me tell you about this, And so I started telling her, and she's like, maybe that's why you're getting through this other stuff as well as you are, because you've already had experience trying to get through trauma.
Right.
But EMDR therapy and talk therapy with my therapist and with other people like me has been the best thing for me.
It's great to hear that the therapist was receptive when you brought it up, and that
she didn't have me. She didn't try to drug me up with a bunch of pills or have me committed. She just let me talk and listened. And I presented her with the evidence, in the book. I said, read this book and then read that one. So, I'm very fortunate.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
very fortunate.
I know a lot of people are afraid to bring it up just because of that reason. They don't want to be treated like they're crazy. They don't want to be thrown a bunch of pills, and that's not really the answer they're looking for.
But when your surgeon looks at you, like when I saw him right after surgery, when he came into my room at the hospital, my husband can attest to this. When your doctor walks in and his eyes are as big as saucers, and he's like, damn, you got weird stuff going on.
Kind of lets you know you're
kind of know. And then, my eye doctor, the first time he looked in my eyes, he was like, oh, because I was young. So I'm still, maybe one of these days I will say something, to them. Maybe, I don't know yet. I'm doing okay now, but it would be really nice if somebody actually would be like, hey, let me have a look at those eyes, or here, let me look at this biopsy report. What's in that, or something.
Right. So you feel like it would definitely be helpful to have someone who knew about what had happened to you and to look into it from that perspective.
Absolutely. And because, always in the back of my mind, I got my dog. And, is this stuff going to kill me one of these days? Because we're not going to be looking for the right thing, because nobody knows what happened to me, but maybe if we are looking for the right things, maybe something that goes wrong can be caught before it kills me. You know what I mean?
Right.
This is what I think in my head.
Yeah.
And I can't be the only person out there who's had contact with something extraordinary or otherworldly, wherever it may come from, that's had some kind of inadvertent, effect on their physical body. I mean, our bodies are kind of, we're tough, but also in some ways, I think we're delicate and that we're susceptible to things. And, like I said, I don't feel like what happened to me was intentional,
Right.
but something definitely had an effect on my body and my mind. Looky, when I was in high school, I got my high school transcripts, and it had my IQ on there as 111, which is perfectly great. I'm happy with that. But several years later, when I met my late husband, and he convinced me to take the test for Mensa, because I was reading books about quantum physics and stuff. Like, I didn't even know what the words meant. I was just reading the book because I just felt like I needed to have that in my head for future reference. And then I took the test for Mensa, and I got invited to join Mensa. The two tests, one was 141 and one was 135, and I scored in the top 1/2 percentile in spatial relations, which kind of explained. I started dreaming in 3D and in color. I started having lucid dreams that I remember, and I used to do this party trick where I put a pen in one hand and a pen in another hand and put paper underneath, and I would write, and my right hand would be the right way and my left hand would be the mirror image of what my right hand did. And I didn't even have to think about it. My brain was just on autopilot.
Oh,
I was
wow.
doing all
That's
kinds of
incredible.
weird stuff, So it changed the wiring in me, in my head somehow too. I also feel like I can feel energy. I can sense everyone has an energy signature around them. They put off, and it's like a fingerprint. And if I know you, I recognize you. You can come up behind me and I'll know it's you if I pay attention.
Right.
So
it's definitely increase your kind of psychic capabilities.
My awareness around me. Yeah. And I even got involved in paranormal activity, paranormal research. I started becoming attracted to that. And I'm really into EVPs, and all the paranormal groups that I run with call me the antenna, because it seems like I get the best EVPs. And honestly, I don't even feel like some of these things that we record are spirits or dead people or have ever lived here and aren't dead and live somewhere else.
Like in another dimension, or?
Yeah, I had this. One of the first EVPs I ever caught 30 years ago. It was that old man's voice that said, "Are the spirits listening?" And that immediately I had the epiphany. Oh my God, I'm a spirit somewhere else. Someone's listening for me. And it was like, I drew a picture one time. I had this vision of a glob of bubbles. Like my kids were playing with those bubble wands out in the yard,
Yeah.
and this big glob of bubbles just floated up to me. And somebody in my head said, "You see those? Those are universes. And you see where they touch? When they touch, we can pass through. But we got to be quick because it's fleeting. It doesn't stay long." And I'm like, what the? Who does that? That's my mind just.
That's incredible. Honestly, that's incredible.
Yeah, and even now, every day I learn something new. I don't know. It's just hard to describe.
So you feel like maybe it kind of opened up some areas of your brain that aren't open like on a normal level, and so that you're able to receive more information or just process things differently, or?
Maybe a little bit of both. I've said I feel like I got rewired, like on an extra bundle of wires that most people didn't get, or maybe somebody just flipped a switch on. Everybody has all the wiring already, but the switches are all flipped off, and
Right.
somebody just came in and flicked my switch on. And I thought, I wonder if it's because, did contact do that? Or was there contact because it had already been done?
Huh.
And if so, why? My mom had an experience when she was a child, some strange little experience, and my kids obviously have had strange things happen to them. So
Are you an only child?
I'm not an only child. No. My older sister, she had a quite dramatic UFO experience in 1965 that we always just took for granted that, it was real, the real deal. She was taking my mom to bingo game. She was just driving and took my mom, dropped her off at bingo. And as she was driving down 10th Street, she felt this compulsion to pull in behind this Holy Spirit church on 10th Street here in Indy. So she pulls in and pulls around to the back. She says she stops her car, looks up. There's this huge silver UFO right over her car, and it lifted her entire car up with her in it. And then the next thing she remembered is she's waking up in her car. It's dark, and it's now time to go get mom from bingo. She had all this time missing.
Oh, wow.
And that was in 1965. So, we've got some
definitely a family history of
strange, weird family. My little sister, she calls herself a medium, and she talks to dead people, basically.
Yeah.
And even though I will say, when she was a little kid, but when she could just talk, she used to tell my mom that she could see colors around people's heads.
Oh, like their auras.
Mm-hmm. And that was when she just was able to speak. So, yeah. Definitely strange bunch over here. But we're a lot of fun at poker games.
Right. And I think it's those kind of strange things that make people great. It's, if everyone were just exactly the same, it would be so boring and there would be nothing to talk about. And
that is a fact. Yeah.
So you haven't spoken to any of your doctors now about what happened. So you're just getting treated for, I guess, for the symptoms, basically. Yeah. Are you still having issues with like the webbing and like the scar tissue, or?
I see the surgeon every year.
Okay.
I see the liver specialist every 6 months. I have to have an ultrasound of the liver and of the gut. And the vascular surgeon that did the balloon angioplasty on my renal artery, every year I have Dopplers of my renal arteries, my carotids, and the main aorta. And so they're monitoring me. Thank God, I have to tell myself, rather than stress out about all this crap that's happening, I have to be grateful that I know about it. And my doctors are keeping a good eye on me.
Right.
So, and I have a great, my primary care physician is an internal specialist. So I see him every 3 months, and once a year blood work is done. And then my cardiologist, I'm watched over by my doctors very closely, and I'm thankful for that. But, I don't know how much different they would treat me if they knew what I'd been exposed to. I don't even know if there's anything they could do at this point. I mean, other than what they're doing right now, which is trying to stay on top of things.
Right.
To catch things early. Yeah.
Yeah. Making sure nothing gets worse and nothing pops up unexpectedly.
Yeah. I had a biopsy of my thyroid. I had a biopsy of my liver. They didn't, they looked at my pancreas, and I have a CAT scan of my lungs once a year, to keep an eye on the nodules in there. So, I mean, I guess that's all you can do, I guess I'm grateful for that. But I don't know what they could do differently, honestly, at this point. Like I said, I'm 65, so.
And you've been dealing with this since 1983, so.
This since 1983. That's 40 years. So. And I'm still kicking.
Yeah, no, and I mean, you look great, and you seem to be, in good spirits, and not letting things get to you. So that's a positive.
Yeah, I'm just rolling with it.
And so now, what do you find is the most helpful in terms of just, helping you get through the day? I know you said that you, when you went with Bud Hopkins, he introduced you to some other experiencers, and he set you up with psychologists and stuff. And now, are you still involved in like any experiencer groups, or what do you find helpful?
I actually, I have a website that my husband now, for 30 years now, we've been married. He he maintains a website for me, and I am able, my email address is on there so people can write to me. So I interact with people like me, and they share their stories with me. Also, I'm a member of Yvonne Smith's Zero group that's out in California.
Okay.
I'm a long distance member, so I attend the Zoom meetings for the long distance members once a month, and I'm an admin for a Zero Midwest experiencer support group on Facebook, and I try to host a Facebook room meeting at least once a month with anybody in the private group that wants to be on there. And I participate in, I'm a co-host with Mike Carter and Deb and RJ DeRoos and Mary Bassett on a Facebook vlog called Voices of Contact. And I do that on Friday nights at 8 p.m. And we have people on the show that are going through regression, and we talk about, how they're feeling and what things they're going through. And then my buddy Greg and we did a Midwest Paratalk radio, internet radio, like 8 or 9 years ago for several years. And it was more predominantly paranormal, but we did have some UFO stuff on there as well. And we've recently resurrected that. So Thursdays we go live stream from 9 to 10:30. And sometimes we just talk about things together, or sometimes we'll have a guest. And I go
What is
out.
the name of that?
It's called Midwest Paratalk Radio, and it's
And
on YouTube.
On YouTube, okay.
Uh-huh.
And what is the name of your website in case people want to reach out to you?
It's www.debshome.com.
And you said your email address is on there, and people can write to you if they feel so inclined.
Right. And of course, then I've written a couple of books trying to, and it, you don't make any money off of these, but I wanted to get it out there so that researchers could maybe use it in case they have other people who had these experiences, to tell my story in the first person, and to show people like me that have been through traumatic things that you can survive it, and you can not just survive it, you can thrive, you can use it to get stronger and better. And you know what I mean? I just want to be a good example to help people to overcome their fear, and just for them to know they're not alone, like paying it forward. So
that's amazing.
I'm retired now, so I have lots more time that I can do all this stuff. And
what are the names of your books?
The first book that I wrote in 92 with my sister Kathie was called Abducted. The Story of Intruders continues. And then the new one that just came out in August of 2021 is called Extraordinary Contact: Life Beyond Intruders. And it talks about some of my paranormal experiences with death, and just all kinds of stuff.
Oh, very cool. It's very cool. And I really love that you are paying it forward, and that you want to help other people who have been through it, because I think that there's not a lot of help out there when people go looking. And so it's important to know where it's available.
Right. Sometimes it just helps to have someone listen with a sympathetic ear and not feel like you're being judged.
Absolutely. So I guess that's pretty much it. Do you have any last minute thoughts or anything that you feel would be important for people to know before we go?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about this kind of stuff, and hopefully that more and more, people in the medical field and the psychological field will get, involved. And I don't know. I just feel like things are changing. I feel the winds of change in the air, and I'm hopeful. So
that's great. Yeah. And hopefully, interviews like this will help to go a long way, getting the medical field on board. So I really appreciate your time, and I actually feel very blessed to be able to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening.